Welcome to episode number 240, where I'm speaking with Kamalesh Hooven of the Mount Madonna Institute about the 8 limbs of yoga and how to tailor an Ayurvedic yoga therapy program, keeping in mind the 8 limbs of yoga, the principles of Ayurveda, the doshas, and the 5 elements. So please stay tuned. Welcome to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. I'm your host, Colette, and I hope to educate and empower you to take charge of your health and well-being, preventing disease in the body and mind so that you can thrive in life. I will be sharing the holistic teachings of Ayurveda, which is the ancient healing tradition from India. Now, if you're new to Ayurveda, I recommend listening to the first couple of episodes where I do an introduction to Ayurveda and the mind-body types. And if you like the content, please be sure to subscribe or follow the podcast so the new episodes will automatically download for you. Also, you may want to check out my private Elements community, which is away from social media. It's a safe space for like-minded people to come together, to connect, to share, to support each other, and to continue the conversation from the podcast episodes. Check out the link in the show notes or visit my website, elementshealingandwellbeing.com, and just click on the community tab. And I hope to connect with you there. Thanks for listening. And now here's a new episode. Imagine this, studying Ayurveda and yoga in the elements on a mountaintop campus on the central coast of California amidst the redwoods overlooking Monterey Bay. Well, there's no need to imagine because this is the location of Mount Madonna Institute, which is a regionally accredited institution whose programs are recognized by Yama. They offer the Ayurvedic Health Counselor and Ayurvedic Practitioner programs, as well as the unique WASC accredited Master of Arts in Ayurveda. Their community of students meet monthly on the mountaintop with complimentary online sessions held weekly. Students dive deeply into Ayurvedic medicine and the study of classical yoga and Sanskrit round out the curriculum. MMI also offers an Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy program, which is approved by both Yama and IAYT. You looking where to begin? Well, look no further. Mount Madonna Institute. Visit them online and see what they have to offer. And you'll find that link in the show notes. Hello and welcome back to the Elements of Ayurveda podcast. Today, I'm very happy to welcome back Kamalesh Hooven, who is Provost of Mount Madonna Institute, a regionally accredited college located on the central coast of California, where she is the director of the Ayurvedic Yoga Therapy program. Kamalesh has a master's degree in Ayurveda and is a certified Ayurvedic practitioner, as well as a certified yoga therapist. And she divides her time between California and her home in Antigua, Guatemala. Kamalesh, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Colette. It's very nice to be back.
It's a pleasure to have you back. And in our previous conversation, it was episode number 234. The title was Integrating Yoga Therapy and Ayurveda. We discussed the 3 bodies, the 5 sheaths, the tanmatras, and the internal limbs of yoga. And today, I would like to discuss the 8 limbs of yoga, and in particular, in regards to an Ayurvedic yoga therapy program that you're tailoring to an individual, right? And you're going to talk about the 8 limbs, but also how you would incorporate them into a individual Ayurvedic yoga therapy program and how they would change with the seasons and the person's time of life and their imbalances and so on. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Lovely. So I think let's start, Kamalesh, with what are the 8 limbs of yoga, please?
So the limbs of yoga are set out by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras. It sets out the 8 principles of yoga. And there are other limbs, there are other systems, and Patanjali's is the one that we're going to refer to today. Although all of the other limbs, my teacher, Baba Hari Das, would say are contained within the 8 limb system, no matter what. But these 8 limbs are ways that we can walk in the world. They sort of provide for us a roadmap to healthy living. And they don't have to be done in the particular order in which they're set out. They can be, you can do it from any sort of direction. So it's more thinking of it like a circle rather than a straight line.
Right.
So being able to access any of the limbs all the way through. So the first limb is called the Yama, or the restraints, or the disciplines. And that really sets out how you're going to be a good citizen in the world. So there are 5 of them. Ahimsa, nonviolence; Satya, truthfulness; Asteya, not stealing; Brahmacharya, continence, or usually sexual energy because of the power behind it; and Aparigraha, non-possessiveness. So you can imagine that someone, if they practiced all of those things, so they're not violent, they don't harm anyone, they don't hurt anyone, they tell the truth, they don't steal your the neighbor's cow, they have sexual continence, they aren't sleeping around, and they aren't possessive, they're sharing, they're giving their goods. Giving what they have and sharing anything that's excess. So that would put that person in a pretty good stance as a citizen. So those first yamas are like a basic principle behind a foundation underneath all of the rest of the practices. The niyams, which are the observances, are sort of really between you and a higher power. No one, well, some of them, someone may know if you're practicing them, but it's really an internal way of looking at the way that you walk in the world. So the first is saucha, which is cleanliness or purity. So when I say that people might know, they might know if you've cleaned your room, but they won't know if you've cleaned yourself internally. They won't know how you presented yourself to the world, right? So cleanliness, saucha; santosha, which is contentment. And that's an active practice of contentment, like looking around you in the world and just being grateful for another day to practice living, being grateful for all of the benefits that you have in the world. And then tapas, or austerities, also being able to kind of withstand and withhold, like going that extra mile before you give in, asking yourself, do I really need this? Do I really want this? So tapas being, it can be as austere as one might want, but also just practicing it on a daily basis, on a regular basis, just asking yourself, do I need this? Do I want this? Is this healthy for me? And the fourth of those 5 is svadhyaya, which means self-study. And it can be studying the sacred text. It can be studying yourself. It can be the simple question, who am I? Why am I? What is my place in the world? How should I walk in the world? And then finally, the last niyam, which is Ishvara Pranidhan, which literally means surrender to God. And Babaji would say, if you can just practice surrender to a higher power, all of the other limbs will fall into place beautifully without effort. Just that understanding that we are not in control, that ultimately there is a rhyme and a reason to the universe that we probably don't understand. So looking for the yam, the restraints and the disciplines, and the niyam, the observances, to sort of set the table for the rest of the practices. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So the Yama is like the moral codes of conduct for how we conduct ourselves in the world externally.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
then the Niyam is the internal practices.
Truly. Yes.
Okay,
yes.
Great. So like you said, it's setting a great foundation to progress forward through the rest of the limbs.
Right. When you get to the Hatha Yoga, Pradipika, which is another text that lays out the practices of yoga, they don't even mention the yam and the niyam because they are the foundation beneath every other limb. They have a couple of extra limbs that are also specifically mentioned in the Yoga Sutras, but the yam and the niyam are the foundation. They really do create that basic way to walk in the world as an individual. And the next limb, Asana, which is what very popularly yoga has become a synonym for for asana, often in the US at least.
Mm.
And the word asana just means seat. And so they were looking for a seat to be able to practice meditation for a longer period of time. So asanas, the purpose behind the asana is to get the body ready for a meditative state. So a lot of times, we have tightness in our legs, tightness in our hips, tightness in our head, tightness in our shoulders, all over our body. And so as we move through specific asana, they can loosen up the joints that are tight. They can lubricate the joints. They can help us find a tall or more erect spine and really help balance the energy body, really balancing the left and the right side, the whole part of our energetic body, which may be a topic for another conversation completely about the energy body, the nadis and the chakras and all of those wonderful parts of our yoga anatomy.
Yes,
but just
indeed.
looking at asana is an entry point, a really great way for people to understand that if we begin to do a practice of asana, of moving our body in a very practiced and meditative and purposeful way, then we can actually see how our whole body opens up and changes. And that allows us to understand that the mind also changes. So it's a great way to bring people into the practice of yoga is through asana. But we want people to understand that is not a synonym for yoga. It's really just one of the limbs, one of the ways to move into the practices.
Absolutely. So it's a purposeful practice, like you said, to get the body moving, lubricate the body, open up those tight areas so that you can sit in meditation.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And there are many, many poses that actually do that. And we can go more into each of those or some of the things that have to happen for us to open up ourselves. But it's super important that we see asana as a step into another area. And it can be a moving meditation. It itself can, practicing asana with triputi, which would be combining body, breath, and mind, really uniting that 3/4 of energy body. Physical body, breath, the moving of the pran through the body, and the mind. Where the mind goes, the pran goes. Where the pran goes, the mind goes. So really using asana as a moving meditation to open up our body-mind complex.
Beautiful. And like I said, it can be a moving meditation in itself, really keeping the mind focused.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, great. And so then moving on to the next limb, which
the fourth limb, pranayama. So we can look at yam. It's the same word, the restraint of the breath, pranayama. So restraining the pranic energy, controlling the breath, restraining the breath. You can also look at it in Sanskrit. If it's ayam, it's expansion. So it can be pranayam. So expanding the breath and then controlling the breath and restricting the breath and then expanding the breath. So using pranayama to expand our energy body, to clear up any of those knots that we have in our body, that tightness around muscles, you can breathe into a muscle. It sounds silly because we know the breath doesn't really go there. But of course, we also know that there is an effect. If someone tells you if your knee is aching and you can sit quietly and breathe into the knee for a little while, there will be a release and some of the energy will move. So just understanding the power of our energy body.
Yeah, and that's it. It is such a powerful practice. And the fact that we do it unconsciously all day, every day for our whole life, that we take it for granted. And I think it's such an amazing tool. And I look forward to hearing more about how you use it in an individualized practice.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Continue on through the limbs and then
the bridge. So those we call the external limbs because they leave a footprint. You can see that those things happen in the person.
Yeah.
Pratyahara is beginning to withdraw the mind from sense perception. So that is beginning to remove all of the sensory input and draw yourself within. So it can be as simple as reflecting on each of the senses, reflecting on sight, and maybe having the eyes open and then closing them, reflecting on hearing and maybe putting in earplugs. So just working with the senses and beginning to take them out of play. Another way is using mudra, which is hand symbols, and like touching. I think most of us have heard of mudra, like Jnani mudra, where you're touching the index finger and the thumb and creating that little circle of energy there while the other fingers are opened. So these little mudras that move and change the energy of the body, also to bring the mind within. So chanting is also a really good way. A mental, just chanting over and over is a really good pratyahara. Mm-hmm. You can also bring the mind in with a visual, like just maybe a yantra, which is a physical representation of a mantra, a saying or a prayer or a deity. So many different ways to peel off the mind. You can, like I mentioned, one of my favorites is doing the mudra of the 5 elements. So bringing each of those elements in, and as you do the mudra, and then by the time you get to after the 5th element, you are just sitting with yourself, hopefully. And then we move into what we call the internal limbs. And those are strictly internal. The differences are internal. We wouldn't know them necessarily. Perhaps you would if you were watching your teacher go into a Samadhi state and stay there for many hours. But on a general basis, especially for those of us who are teaching meditation, the relationship that an individual has with these 3 limbs is very, very personal. So Dharana is concentration. And that's really what we teach. That's really all we can teach is Dharana, giving someone an object of concentration. It can be a physical representation of something. It can be a mantra. It can be a word. It can be a song. It can be many different things. But giving someone an object of concentration and asking them to place their mind on that object of concentration. So just like asana is beginning to work with the physical body, just like pranayama is beginning to work with the breath, Dharana is beginning to work with the mind. So it's a mental exercise, a mental bringing the mind back into the same place. So often when we start, let's say, just for example, it's a very simple practice. We're going to practice for 5 minutes. We set an alarm, a bell, something that's not so brusque. We set a bell and for 5 minutes, and your object of concentration is Om. And so the mind goes Om, Om, Om. Where did I put my teacup this morning? Om, Om. Oh, I really wish I didn't have to go to work. So we keep going back to it. And it's that taking ourselves back to it that is the discipline that's really
the
required.
Anchor point. Yes.
Right.
Yes,
It's
so
just bringing it back. And that's the practice of Dharana. If that bell rings and for 5 minutes you only thought of Om, then you have practiced Dhyana, which is meditation. It's just one constant flow of Om. And the bell rings and, oh my goodness, you've meditated. And if by some odd chance, at some point, you dropped out of the picture and it's just Om-ness and you merge with Om and you realize that you are Om and everything else in the universe, then that is the Samadhi state. And so we can't know if someone internally is practicing Samadhi or Dhyana or Dharana. Truly, we can't truly know that. Only that person can know that. Yeah.
Right. That's the internal journey.
Absolutely. The internal limbs. Yes.
Yeah. And so when you're designing an individual Ayurvedic yoga therapy program for somebody, you're really talking to them and incorporating, I should say, the first 5 limbs then.
As much as possible. You incorporate the 6. You want to incorporate Dharana, concentration.
Right.
And giving them tools to use for concentration. And it's probably the most important practice we can teach someone is to be able to concentrate. Yeah. But it's a practice. It's not something you just sit down and do and blank the mind, right? That's not going to happen. Right. The mind, it is its own thing, right? It just keeps thinking because it thinks it's supposed to be thinking all the time. Yeah.
Yes. And especially in this world where we're so used to multitasking and there's so many interruptions and devices and things taking away our attention that it is a challenge. So the art of concentration is something we could all work on. Definitely.
Truly. Just getting someone to put away their electronic equipment, their phones and their iPads and their computers and everything an hour before bed is an amazing yoga practice. That is a really good yoga practice where that person is just withdrawing. That's an austerity. That's a tapas. They're withdrawing, and they're withdrawing the mind from how that sensory perception is so stimulated at that time. So you might not think that taking away someone's electronics is a yoga practice, but it is. It is. It truly is. And it can be a very powerful one too, when someone realizes how they have been filling their mind. And so getting them to just sit, perhaps with a book or a candle or just nothing for a little while and just reflect. Maybe watching the clouds, the mental clouds go by and not engaging. But there's so many ways to help someone refocus the mind and know that the mind responds to being refocused. And the mind also is going to rebel, right? It doesn't want to be shut down at all.
Right.
That's just part of that's how the mind is.
Yeah. So it's kind of trying to corral the mind and not letting it take you for a ride and all your emotions and everything else with it.
Absolutely.
Taking a little moment out here to bring you a word from our sponsor, Kerala Ayurveda Academy. The world is remembering ancient traditions, and our planet needs people like you to spread their wisdom. If you're passionate about holistic health, Kerala Ayurveda Academy welcomes you to study online or in person. You'll gain all the tools you need to upgrade your lifestyle, align with nature, and inspire others to do the same. To learn more, visit keralaayurveda.us/courses, and you'll find that link in the show notes. Okay, let's get back to my conversation with Kamalesh. Thank you so much for that explanation of the 8 limbs. That's fantastic to get that foundation. And what I'd love to talk about now is what we mentioned earlier is how do you incorporate these into an individual yoga therapy program?
Yes. Well, let's look first, just remind ourselves of our principles of Ayurveda. Okay. Let's just back to the very basics. So going back to the fact that Ayurveda is based on the 5 elements. So starting from the most subtle, it would be space, what's around us, all of the space in which we, in your room or in your town or in your car or wherever you happen to be, the space in which creation is happening. And then the air, the movement principle, just the movement, maybe a breeze in the trees. Internally, of course, it's the breath in the air. The space internally is the space in each organ, the space in all of the orifices of the body. And then we have the fire element. So you can, friction or metabolic energy within the body, all of the mitochondria in each of the cells outside of us. The sun is probably one of the most powerful examples of heat. And then water. The water element, of course, our blood and our saliva and everything inside of us, outside the rivers and the streams and the rain and the torrents of water. And then earth, the earth principle. the solidity in our structure. It's of course the body, it's the muscles and the bones and the cartilage and the organs themselves, everything that's solid. And outside of us, of course, it's the earth and the rocks and the trees and the buildings and all of these structures that we have, these building blocks. So when we look at those 5 elements and we layer on top the principle of the 3 doshas, which is of course vata, our airy principle, mm-hmm. which is combining our space and air. And then pitta, our fire principle, which is combining fire and water, or often oil, a liquid. And then earth, our solid principle, the kapha, which is earth and water, thinking mud. Mm-hmm. So thinking of these being very, very different. And then the siddhanta, the basic principles is every cause has an effect, like increases like, and opposites decrease. Mm-hmm. So just with those 3 principles in mind, it's easy to see that the practice that we engage in, the yoga practices that we engage in when we're in our 20s, which is the pitta time of life, mm-hmm. won't be the same practices that we have in our 60s, which is the vata time of mm-hmm. life. Yeah. And so we need to be changing them as we go. And the seasons, if it's summer, then there's a lot more heat, and we need to think about the opposite. So we wouldn't have a very heating practice, because we would already have some heat within the body just because of the season. Mm. And if it's cold, we wouldn't want to do a cooling down practice, because we're going to lay on the floor and shiver. So when we want to be in shavasana, if it's too windy, which would be spring and fall often, we want to lower that movement, the activity that's happening in that area. So it's really beginning to see how an individual plays out in their prakriti and their vikriti. So prakriti is the dosha that you were born with. It's the combination of doshas. We all have all 3 doshas. We all have all 5 elements, but usually something rules. Not always. Sometimes 2 of them can rule. You can be a vata pitta, or you can be a pitta kapha. But looking at someone's prakriti, and then primarily when we're just designing this practice, looking also at their vikriti, which is their imbalance, and see if we can help them get back into balance. I can remember teaching a class once in a yoga teacher training. So it was where you have time to talk and discuss a lot of what's going on in the classroom. And so there was a guy, redheaded, freckled, lots of muscle, which is a very pitta quality. And the whole room, we were leaning over with wide legs to do a pose. And he went right up on his head and went right into a headstand. Mm. And I thought to myself, well, Mr. Pitta here is going to show off in front of everybody, right? And so I just saw him do that throughout the class. Anything I would give them, mm-hmm. he would take it to the next degree, right? So then when class is over, and we're standing around, and he really couldn't stay in shavasana. He just kind of got up, sat up. So I said something about being a pitta, and he went, "I am not a pitta."
Let me argue with you on that. Not in the least bit competitive.
And I didn't know. It's like sometimes it's so hard for us to recognize where we are in the world and where we're going, right?
Well, that's a disillusionment in itself, right? That we haven't quite we haven't quite figured ourselves out, which is the first part of the journey.
Truly. And just seeing that, it was hot. It was summer. It was a hot month and a hot day. And we're doing the practice at 11 a.m. before lunch. And it's like, whoa. So beginning to look at those principles of what's causing that, right? What's causing that anger? What's causing that rush of anger? Like, I don't know. I have I went to a heated yoga class, and when I got out of the class and went to one, that was all, because I'm Pitta enough to know that was not the thing for me. But when I came out of class, I slammed the car door. And it was like, okay, well, take a little look at yourself, Miss Pitta here. This is not your class, right? You need to find something a little different. So it's recognizing that, like Pittas are very rewarded in our society, very rewarded, because they are focused and they are a leader and they really can make a decision and they can just move quickly in the world, right? Quickly and purposefully. So when you're, when I think about just thinking about a Pitta person, looking at their practice, thinking, is there anything you're doing that's overheating you? Is there anything you're doing that you can call upon to balance, to like increases like, so not adding heat, opposites decrease. Can you cool it down a little bit? So if you're practicing in the middle of practice and all of a sudden you realize you're hot and you're bothered and not just hot like a little layer of sweat. I mean, hot like your mind is hot. Your eyes are hot. You feel hot. That's the time to just sit down and cool off and just wait for the practice. Babaji used to teach a class with 4 or 5 asana and then shavasana. 4 or 5 asana, then shavasana, which of course is corpse pose. So just not overheating the body, challenging the body, but not overheating the body. And also, of course, if it's a cold day, you're not going to lay in a 15-minute shavasana without blankets over you. So also being very realistic about how your body feels in space, right? So there are all of the practices have a vidya, which is a quality of hot or cold or medium, right? Everything has a quality. So an asana has a quality, a pranayama has a quality, a pratyahara has a quality, and even a meditation itself has a quality. Like giving someone a tether, like some people can really go with a guided meditation. They need someone in their ear telling them what to do. They need to be told, relaxing the face, relaxing your chest, relaxing your belly. They need to hear that to happen. Some other person, just hearing that just makes them angry. Like, can you just shut up and let me just think about my own? Right? So finding what's the perfect practice for that individual. And as the imbalance changes, the practice may need to change. So perhaps it's someone who had a vata vitiation and they really needed a guided meditation. And then 3 or 4 months into the practice, as their vata is becoming controlled, and they're finding more purpose, then they can take a little bit of a guided meditation. Maybe out of the 5 minutes, they have 1 minute of guided and then a 2 minute of silence, and then 1 minute of guided and 1 minute of silence. And then their meditation's done because their mind now is more controlled and they're ready for that. But if you keep them in the guided, they're eventually going to just not respond in a positive way because the mind needs that space. They need that openness that would be required, right? So you have to help someone listen to their own body mind. We practitioners who are giving people suggestions have no idea how it's falling on them. I mean, they have to really see how it's falling on them and tell us that, and we can help them adjust appropriately. So when I think of asana, I think of something like a series for the kapha time of year, so the winter time of year, or for the kapha hour of the day. So early morning practice, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's the kapha time of day. So a sun salute or a moon salute or some sort of an active practice. That's the best time of the day to do it. From 10 to 2, which is the pitta time of day, that would be time for a more slow moving practice, a more purposeful practice, not a quickly moving Surya Namaskar. Not a hot yoga. Absolutely not a hot yoga class. And then in the afternoon from 2 to 6, that's not the time for a vinyasa. You know, I used to teach a vinyasa class at 4, and it would fill up with all of the vatas. They all wanted to just fly all over the place. So as a teacher, you learn, let's trick them, then let's let them fly over the place for the first 30 minutes and then move them slowly down to the floor until they're like in Shavasana, and finally at the end of the class, really relaxing, you know.
Yeah, which is perfect because that short spurt of vata energy is energetic at the start, but quickly drops off, right? So it's perfect to do that.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really looking at each of the practices. So the asana, and like, for example, if we have the seats of the doshas, right? So the seat of kapha is in the chest region, the lung area, the throat, the esophagus, moving up into the sinuses. That is our kapha region. Our pitta region is in our belly, from our sternum down to the pubic area, which is the center part of the body, which is our small intestine, pretty much. The liver and the spleen are also pitta organs, but just the middle of the body. And then the bottom of the sides of the body, like with the colon, basically. So the colon and the legs, and those are all of our vata areas. So when we're doing particular poses, they have an intelligence to them that if we put pressure at the seat of the dosha, they help balance that dosha with their own cosmic intelligence, with the buddhi. So if I need to balance pitta, maybe I'm laying on my belly and doing alligator pose, just lifting my arms and my legs a little to put more pressure right at the area of the small intestine. If I need to balance vata, maybe I flip over on my back and draw one knee into the chest into Pavan Muktasan, wind releasing pose. And then I switch legs, or happy baby too is a great pose that really puts pressure into the colon, just bringing the legs into the body, holding on to the feet, and puts great pressure on the area of the colon to help vata bring itself back into balance. And kapha, doing some back bending, like also when you do that alligator on the floor, because you're also lifting in the chest region, it's also balancing to kapha. So a good kapha pitta balancing.
Opening up that chest area.
Absolutely. And a twist can be, like a twisting into a leg. It can be very, very stimulating to both pitta and vata, because of the pressure that happens at the colon. So depending upon the area of the twist, if you twist with an open twist and opening out, then it's going to be primarily pitta. So just looking at the seats of the doshas and seeing where you are putting that pressure, and see if you can have some poses that lead to that. The whole idea of practicing so many different poses in a 90-minute period probably is not a very ancient practice.
Yes. It's not about checking off the different postures.
Right. I remember, because of an imbalance, I was given to do one pose. I was given to do cobra pose and hold it for 5 minutes. One pose to help open my chest and put pressure on my belly. So, and that was my asana. That was it. And then I remember later, when I had something with my kidneys, I was given one pose, which is stand on my toes.
Right.
And that was it. Stand on my toes, which it really helps the low back muscles to engage and kind of massage right around there, because you're kind of rebalancing every moment while you're standing on your toes. Right. So we're in the kapha time of day and the kapha season, doing a Surya Namaskar quickly might be the perfect warm up. But in summer, at the pitta time of day, we wouldn't want to touch it. We'd want to do some sort of a joint warm up, like lubricating each of the joints very mindfully and purposefully, right? And then doing some challenging poses, because pitta does like to be challenged, but doing it mindfully and watching the breath and really bringing in that principle of triputi, body, breath, mind, union, body, breath, mind. Keeping that principle at the utmost part, right? And asking yourself as you practice, Svadhyaya, asking yourself, how am I? How is my mind? How is my body? How is my breath? If you've lost your breath, if your breath control is gone, then you aren't practicing properly. You should always be able to find your breath, slow down the breath, regulate the breath. And it doesn't mean that you're doing, our teacher taught us not to really be doing a pranayama practice in the middle of an asana practice, that you can do, like in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, it mentions that Ujjayi pranayama is a practice that's good for standing, seated, walking, and laying down. So that's a practice that you could do while you're practicing asana, but you wouldn't just thread it through unless you're doing some of the mudra series where you are actually combining asana and pranayama together to form a mudra. So maybe taking a pause during an asana practice to sit down and do some shithali or sitkari if it's hot, which are the cooling breaths and the hissing breath that bring the air in through the open mouth, which then cools off the cilia around the tongue and then cools off the mind, cools off the brain itself. So stopping to do that practice, but not just kind of threading it in the middle of it.
Right. And even with the Ujjayi breath, watching the intensity of that, because when I used to teach yoga, those are the high pitta constitution, used to love to really be intense about that Ujjayi breath. So, and that can have an effect too.
And like we always we'll often say the Darth Vader breath, but you shouldn't hear that. Darth Vader is just between you and Darth, right? It should not be so vocal out into the room. I mean, it's really to bring your concentration in more internally. So we don't really recommend using Ujjayi in practice, but it's fine if someone wants to. The scriptures say it's good for everything. Practice Ujjayi, but we really recommend just being conscious of the breath and regulating the inhale and the exhale. For a beginner, moving in and out of a pose is really good. Like, for example, a pose like warrior. So, bending the knee and then coming out of it on an inhale, and bend the knee on an exhale and come out of it on an inhale. That kind of repetition is really good for opening the muscles, for opening the joint, for helping someone find stability. But once someone has the practice, then it's really good to just go into the pose and there hold for all of those breaths, and just seeing how the body changes, seeing how the breath changes, seeing how everything is affected in the body, in the breath, in the mind.
Absolutely. And I think especially in today's world where we all can be affected by vata, because again, there's so much going on externally, that the more we can bring ourselves back into our body, integrate ourselves in our practice, feel our hands and feet on the mat and really be present in that moment. It's so grounding for us because we're so externally focused these days.
Absolutely. And one of the things that happens for people that are now working so much on their computers is just setting a little alarm on your computer where you have a moment in your day. I recommend several moments in the day where you pause and take a few conscious breaths and maybe do a couple of asana in the chair. You can, reach around and do a twist. You can fold your body over and do a forward fold. You can reach and hold the chair behind you and open your chest and arch. So all of these things that are stimulating the spine and the nervous system and the brain are so good for bringing us back to the moment and back to the moment.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, putting a little chime on your phone or on your computer as a reminder. It's a wonderful idea because we can get so caught up in our work that just having those little times out to bring ourselves back to the present moment is really great practice.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think practicing some austerity for most of us in this day and time is really good. I used to, my kitchen was suited that I could go down into the kitchen. I had to go down some stairs to get to the kitchen, and I could lift my leg and hover it above the counter because that counter was lower than my regular counter now. I could hover my leg above the counter while the tea kettle was on.
Very good.
And so I would just go from leg to leg until the tea whistled, right?
Great.
And that was my morning austerity to work my quadriceps, which really needed it.
Yeah, but that's great, incorporating, into little practice that you do already. I remember I used to have clients when they're brushing their teeth, just bring, do a little tree pose, like bring your on your toes and bring your foot to your ankle. Like think little ways of incorporating these practices throughout the day is fantastic.
Absolutely. And selecting what you need. Like a lot of people go to classes, and I really encourage everybody to have their own home practice. And it can be 5 minutes. It can be 10 minutes. It can be whatever you can do, but you and your mat and nobody else in the room, and you cultivate a practice. And it may be that's when you sit for your 5 minutes. It may be that's when you do 5 minutes of pranayama. It may be when you do 2 or 3 asana and nothing more, but that you cultivate a practice that is your own practice every single day.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned at the very beginning, it can be a practice of Yama or Niyama, right? It can be a practice of practicing contentment. I wake up and the first thing I do after I swing my legs off the floor is just be grateful that I have one more opportunity to not mess up.
Yeah.
Just that practice of contentment. I think we're often so fortunate that we have food on our table. We have a shelter in which to live. And we forget that. We forget that can be an active practice. And for someone who is always thinking me, 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 thinking others, others, others is a powerful practice. And that has to do with aparigraha, non-possessiveness. Finding something that you love and giving it away, which can be so helpful for someone and that's a practice, finding something you love and giving it away. And then it gets easier the next time and easier the next time. So one of the things about Ayurvedic yoga therapy is you are always looking at the yoga practices through the lens of Ayurveda. So you're always looking at the practices through Vata, Pitta, Kapha, through the 5 elements. And what is perfect for someone in one stage of life, as we mentioned, may not be perfect in the next stage of life. And even like here in California, one day the fog can roll in and it's cold and chilly, and the next day it's sunny and hot, and it's very Vata vitiating to have that up and down and up and down. And so finding a practice that can be solid through that time, that is just, a solid, even practice where you're not overdoing anything and everything is measured, can often be like the perfect practice for all of us. I think going through the joints, we have this joint series that, it starts at your feet and you come all the way up your ankles and then your knees and then your hips and then your spine and then your arms and shoulders. So just working up the body and working very consciously doing that, moving into a somatic practice, which is very slow, coordinating breath and movement, and very slow, working on retraining the muscles in the body to react to the mind, so that the mind-body relationship is enhanced. A lot of times, I remember the first time I was practicing an asana, it was warrior pose. And the teacher said, engage your quadricep. And I was like, say what? And she said, engage your quad. And I couldn't even imagine how I could engage it. And she flicked it with her middle finger. You know how you flick something, like she flicked it, and it just went right on line. I didn't even know I could affect a quad. I had no idea. So, I think learning about our body and realizing how we can improve the communication between the body and the mind. It's amazing how much we can improve that communication. I had a fall and a frozen shoulder was the result. And it took 2 years before I could again do namaste behind my back. But it took 2 years, and it was worth every moment to put me in the place of so many people that I work with to see patience and self-love are the key. Patience and self-love.
Absolutely. And as you're saying, it's understanding our body, connecting with our body, just like you said, a foundation with the 8 limbs and particularly Yama and Niyama, that you set a foundation of understanding your Prakriti and maybe your signs of imbalance and getting really in tune with your body. So then you can understand when you tune in every day, what do I need today? How do I feel physically, mentally? What season am I in? What's the weather like? Being able to really tune into your body to see what it needs. So that's where we want to get people to, right? So that they can manage their own practices.
That's where we want to get people to. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We really do.
But at the start of this, Kamalesh, it really is important to have that guidance. As you talked about Mr. Ginger Pittaman earlier, that, he obviously was, very involved in learning, but it is hard to be objective sometimes. And so having someone to guide you and while you're learning these practices and learning about your Prakriti and your Vikriti and so on, it's so important at the start.
It is so hard initially. And that's why I think a yoga therapist should be someone who's a friendly guide and gives you things to try on, and you try them and then you come back and you see how it works. And it shouldn't be... it should be a collaborative effort.
Absolutely.
Really. It should be really collaborative. You shouldn't just have someone assign you something.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the things that I have found for many practitioners who've been practicing yoga for years and practicing asana and pranayama and a little bit of everything, the first thing I ask them to do is see their practice, because often they're doing something that's just exacerbating a problem elsewhere.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's as simple as if they could just take their feet back a little bit further, because now their joints are a little more open as they're moving into the Vata stage of life, and they need a more muscular control than just hanging in a joint. So sometimes it's just a matter of tweaking what someone is already doing, or saying, okay, now that took you 5 minutes to do that. I want you to do the same exact thing, but slowly. I want you to stretch it out to 10 minutes. I want you to take 5 breaths for every single pose, so that they become more purposeful in their practice, right?
Absolutely. Well, Kamalesh, thank you so much. This was great. It's so great to go through the limbs and then to hear about how you incorporate them and how you set it up, where you're looking at the elements and the doshas, and that's always underlying. And the principles of like increases like and opposites balance, all that is underlying your choices. So it's great to see how you lay it out.
I'm so glad that I hope it can be helpful for people to use, and also just to understand that your practice is your practice, and create a small home practice to give you a foundation and some stability. Yeah.
Beautiful. So Kamalesh, before we finish up here, I'd love for you to tell people where they can find out more information about the programs that you offer.
Yes, Mount Madonna Institute. We are at www.mountmadonnainstitute.org. And we are in the Santa Cruz Mountains overlooking Monterey Bay, a beautiful spot. Our campus is lovely, and people can come and enjoy staying there with our delicious vegetarian meals. We have cabins, we have rooms. We offer the Ayurvedic Health Counselor program. We have a Master of Arts in Ayurveda and the Practitioner program. We have yoga teacher training, advanced yoga studies, foundational yoga studies. We have a lot of different workshops that we offer. And we all view ourselves as constant students. I view myself as a student of yoga and Ayurveda. It's a path that you'll never stop learning, and that you'll never stop exploring. So at Mount Madonna, we like to think that we hold that container for transformation. And you come and you be with us and you transform.
That's beautiful. Absolutely lovely. And I have the bells in the background here.
That's a beautiful way to go out, Kamalesh.
Absolutely. Well, Kamalesh, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you, Colette. Thanks so much.
Pleasure. Take good care of yourself and come back and visit us again soon.
I'd love to. I would love to.
Bye for now. I hope you enjoyed that episode with Kamalesh, and please check out the show notes for all the links mentioned in this episode. If you think that this information will be helpful to family or friends, please share it with them. And if you haven't already subscribed or followed the podcast, please do so. And if you're finding the podcast helpful, then I would appreciate a rating and review so we can spread this wisdom with others. Also, you can find my online services on elementshealingandwellbeing.com. I'll put that link in the show notes, and on social media you'll find me under Elements Healing and Wellbeing on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time, take good care of yourself, be well, and bye for now. Slán go fóill.